The man nobody recognized. The restaurant was warm with soft lights and the faint sound of jazz. The kind of place where people came not only for food, but for the feeling of being seen, of being part of something fine. It was late evening, and the tables were nearly full. Couples leaned close together. Friends laughed too loudly, and waiters hurried with trays balanced like fragile crowns. In the middle of this busy room, a man in worn jeans and a simple black shirt stepped inside. His hair was messy, his boots carried the dust of the street, and his shoulders bent slightly as though he wanted to disappear into the crowd. He looked like any tired traveler, but his eyes held a strange depth, the kind that carried both pain and kindness. The waiter at the door noticed him immediately, his smile fading into something colder. He gave a quick glance up and down, judging the stranger's clothes, the tired face, the quiet presence that did not match the polished customers around. "We don't serve your kind here," the waiter said, his voice sharp, cutting through the music. The room grew quieter. A few customers turned their heads, sensing conflict. The stranger paused, his expression calm, almost too calm, as if he had heard such words before. For a moment, he seemed like he might leave, but instead he stood still, his eyes steady on the waiter, not angry, just searching, as though trying to understand. If anyone had looked closer, they might have recognized him. They might have seen the man who had given away millions quietly to children's hospitals, the man who walked the streets of Los Angeles alone, buying coffee for strangers, the man whose face had lived on countless screens across decades. They might have whispered his name, KeanuReeves. But tonight, dressed in nothing but humility, he was invisible. The waiter crossed his arms, as if daring him to resist. "This is a place for real customers," he added, his voice carrying enough volume for others to hear. A woman at the bar laughed softly as if the scene amused her. Another man shook his head and muttered something about standards. The stranger remained silent, his patience like a wall against the rising cruelty. Inside, though, memories stirred. Keanu thought of his younger days, when rejection had been a daily guest at his table. When directors said he was not strong enough, not handsome enough, not loud enough. He thought of nights sleeping on borrowed couches, the hollow sound of doors closed in his face. He had risen, yes, but the echoes of those days still lived inside him. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "May I at least have a glass of water?" The waiter gave a short laugh. "Water is for guests. You are not a guest." The words cut deeper than intended, and in the silence that followed, even those who had laughed grew uneasy. There was something cruel about denying water to a thirsty man. Keanu lowered his eyes. He could have shouted his name. He could have pulled out proof that he was the owner of this very restaurant, a place he had invested in not for profit but to create jobs for people who had none, to bring warmth to a city that often turned cold. He could have ended the waiter's arrogance in a single sentence, but he did not. Instead, he stepped aside, moved toward the corner, and sat quietly on a bench meant for those waiting for a table. No one invited him. No one offered him comfort. He simply sat, watching the people who judged him without knowing who he was. A child across the room noticed him. Children always did. They saw beyond clothes, beyond faces. The little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, that man looks kind," he whispered. But the mother hushed him, too focused on her meal to care. As the minutes passed, tension grew in the air, a strange unease that no one could name. Some diners avoided looking his way, embarrassed perhaps, while others stared openly, enjoying the quiet drama. The waiter, proud of his stance, walked past him more than once, each time smirking as if to remind him of his place. Inside, Keanu felt the familiar ache of humanity's weakness, this endless hunger to separate, to divide, to decide who was worthy and who was not. Yet he also felt something else, a spark of resilience, the same spark that had carried him through loss, grief, and loneliness. What no one knew was that this moment, small and cruel as it seemed, would change the course of the night. Secrets would be revealed, loyalties tested, and the truth would come crashing through the room like a storm. But for now, the stranger sat in silence. his kindness mistaken for weakness, his patience mistaken for defeat, and the waiter, unaware of the storm he had awakened, continued his work with a smile that would soon vanish. The night had only begun, and the story of who truly owned this place was waiting to be told. Whispers in the shadows, the restaurant seemed to carry two different worlds that night. On one side, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air as people enjoyed their meals, unaware of the tension just a few feet away. On the other side, in the corner near the waiting bench, Keanu sat in silence, unnoticed by most and dismissed by those who had seen him. The waiter, still proud of his decision, moved from table to table with a polished smile. But every time he passed the quiet man in the corner, something inside him stirred, though he pushed it away. Arrogance has a way of blinding the heart, and he clung to the belief that he had done the right thing, keeping the restaurant clean. But whispers began to spread. "Who is he?" a woman asked her husband in a low voice, glancing toward Keanu. "Some drifter, maybe," the man replied, shaking his head. "Doesn't belong here." Yet another diner leaned closer, his tone softer. "I've seen him before. On the street, he once gave his jacket to a homeless man. I swear it's him. He's an actor." The husband laughed, dismissing the thought. An actor? Not dressed like that. But the seed had been planted. Slowly, curiosity began to grow among the diners. People who had first ignored him now stole quick glances, studying the lines of his face, the quiet grace in the way he sat. Keanu felt their eyes but did not return them. Instead, he remembered something his mother once told him when he was young, and the world seemed too heavy. True strength is not in how loud you are, but in how long you can wait without breaking. His patience was not weakness, it was a test. The child who had noticed him earlier got up from his seat, slipping away from his distracted parents. He walked across the room, holding a small piece of bread in his hand. He stopped in front of Keanu, his big eyes full of innocence. "Are you hungry, sir?" the boy asked softly. The room froze. Those who saw it were struck silent. The waiter's face turned red, his pride cracking as he rushed forward. "Go back to your seat," the waiter barked at the boy. "Don't bother that man." But Keanu smiled gently at the child, accepting the bread with both hands as if it were the greatest gift in the world. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means more than you know." The boy grinned, then hurried back to his table, unaware of the storm he had just set in motion, because now the whispers grew louder. "Did you see how he thanked the boy?" one woman murmured. "He's no ordinary man," another said. The waiter, unsettled, marched to the corner. "Listen," he said sharply. "You've been sitting here long enough. You're making the guests uncomfortable. It's time for you to leave." For the first time that evening, Keanu lifted his head fully, his eyes meeting the waiter's. They were not angry, but they carried a depth that made the waiter shift uncomfortably. "Do I truly make them uncomfortable?" Keanu asked quietly. "Or do I make you uncomfortable?" The words hung heavy in the air. Some diners gasped softly, as though truth had just been spoken in a place not used to hearing it. The waiter's face tightened, but before he could answer, a voice rose from the back. An older woman, sitting alone at a table, spoke firmly. "I know who he is." All eyes turned to her. She stood, her cane tapping softly against the floor. "That man is KeanuReeves. I met him once, years ago, when my grandson was in the hospital. He sat with us. He stayed for hours even though we were strangers. He held my grandson's hand when he was afraid. You call him unworthy, but he carries more worth in his silence than many do in their noise." Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the waiter's pride began to crumble. Keanu did not deny it. He did not boast. He simply lowered his eyes again, as though the truth was too heavy to wear like armor. But now the balance of the room had shifted. Customers who had judged him now felt shame prickling at their skin. Those who had whispered in doubt now leaned forward, eager to see what would happen next. And the waiter, his arrogance turning into fear, realized he had not just turned away a stranger. He had turned away the very man who owned the place where he worked. But the night was not done with him yet. More truths waited in the shadows, ready to be revealed, and the lesson of humility was only beginning. The breaking point, the air in the restaurant grew heavy, as if every person inside had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. The older woman's words echoed in their minds, breaking through the noise of judgment that had filled the room only minutes before. The waiter stood frozen, his face pale. He wanted to deny it, to laugh and call the woman mistaken. But deep down, something inside him already knew the truth. The calm man in the corner, dressed so simply, was indeed KeanuReeves. But the revelation did not bring peace. It brought tension. Some guests felt shame for the way they had looked at him. Others leaned closer, desperate for more confirmation, their curiosity turning into a hunger, and a few, too proud to admit their mistake, muttered under their breath, convincing themselves that a man of such fame would never sit quietly like this. Keanu remained still. He did not rise, did not speak, did not correct anyone. Silence was his shield, and humility was the language he chose, but inside he was listening. He was measuring the room, feeling the weight of every whisper, every stare, every hidden truth. The waiter finally broke. "This is ridiculous," he said too loudly, his voice shaking. "You're all wrong. He's just some drifter who wandered. And I know the kind. I've seen them before. They dress down, they sit around, waiting for sympathy. And you—" He pointed at Keanu with trembling hands. "You're no different." The accusation struck the room like thunder. People shifted uncomfortably. Some gasped. Others glared at the waiter. But Keanu only lifted his head slightly, his eyes calm, almost sorrowful. "What kind is that?" Keanu asked softly. The question was not loud, but it carried through the restaurant like a bell. The waiter opened his mouth, but no answer came, because the truth was, his words had been born from pride, not reason. Before the silence could grow too long, another voice entered. This time, it was the restaurant's head chef, who had stepped out of the kitchen after hearing the rising noise. His apron was stained, his face tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Enough," the chef said firmly. "I know who he is too, and if you had any sense, you'd know as well. This man is not just our owner. He is the reason half of us even have jobs. When the world shut down and no one had work, he kept paying the staff. When I couldn't feed my family, he made sure groceries arrived at my door. And you," he turned to the waiter, "you stand here and speak to him like he is nothing." The room stirred again, emotions colliding like waves. Shame, awe, disbelief, regret. Keanu finally rose to his feet. His movements were slow, deliberate, and the room quieted at once, as though everyone knew something important was about to happen. He looked around, his eyes meeting faces one by one. Not accusing, not shaming, only searching, as though he wanted them to see themselves clearly. "I came here tonight not to be honored," he began softly, "but to sit, to breathe, to remember what it means to be among people without needing to be seen. Yet what I found instead was a reminder of how quickly we measure each other, how easily we decide who belongs and who does not." The room was still. Even the jazz music in the background seemed distant. "Worth is not in clothes," he continued. "Not in wealth, not in power. Worth is in the kindness we show to one another, especially when we believe no one is watching. Tonight many of you chose judgment instead of kindness. Heads lowered, eyes turned away. But then his gaze softened and his voice grew gentler. Yet one child gave me bread. One child reminded me that innocence can still see the truth, and an elder spoke with courage when silence would have been easier. That tells me there is still hope, even when pride clouds our vision." The waiter swallowed hard, his arrogance shattered. He tried to speak, but no words came. Keanu looked at him, not with anger, but with something far more piercing. Mercy. "What you said to me was cruel," he admitted. "But cruelty is often born from fear. I will not punish you tonight. But I hope you remember this moment, because how you treat a stranger is who you truly are." The words landed heavy, striking deeper than any punishment could. And with that, Keanu turned, ready to leave. But just as his hand reached for the door, Another twist waited in the shadows, one that no one in the room could have expected, one that would shake the night apart and reveal just how fragile the masks of society truly are. The storm at the door. Keanu's hand was just inches from the door handle when the restaurant door suddenly swung open. Cold night air rushed inside, carrying with it the sound of hurried footsteps and sharp voices. 3 men entered, dressed in expensive suits but carrying the weight of arrogance heavier than gold. Their laughter was loud, careless, filling the space with a harshness that clashed with the quiet tension of the room. "Table now," one of them barked at the nearest waiter. "The best one. We don't wait." The waiter nodded nervously, rushing to obey, but the men pushed past him as if he were invisible. Their eyes scanned the room, seeking dominance, seeking recognition. And then, one of them noticed Keanu standing near the door. He smirked, nudged his friend, and spoke loudly, enough for everyone to hear. "Look at this," he sneered. "Some vagrant thinks he belongs in here. Unbelievable." The words cut through the air like a blade, and for a moment, all eyes turned again to Keanu. Whispers rippled. Had they not just learned their lesson? Yet here it was, repeating itself, but louder, sharper, more dangerous. The arrogant men did not stop. One stepped closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "Places like this should keep the door locked at night. Otherwise anyone can just walk in." The waiter who had insulted Keanu earlier froze where he stood. Shame burned in his chest, for these words sounded too much like his own. But before Keanu could respond, the head chef stormed forward, his voice firm. "Enough," he said. "Show some respect. This man—" But Keanu raised his hand gently, stopping the chef mid-sentence. "Let them speak," Keanu said quietly. "Their words reveal more about them than they do about me." The men laughed again, mistaking patience for weakness. They moved toward a table, but one of them could not resist turning back for a final insult. "If the owner of this place had any pride, he'd never let people like you in." The silence that followed was thick, unbearable. Then Keanu stepped forward, his presence suddenly larger, stronger, filling the room with quiet power. "You are right," he said softly. "The owner of this place does have pride, but not the kind you speak of. His pride is in serving every soul who walks through this door with dignity, because this place was not built for the rich alone. It was built for humanity." The arrogant men laughed again, though their smiles faltered slightly. "And what would you know of the owner?" one asked mockingly. Keanu's eyes met his, steady and calm. "I know him," he said, "because I am him." Gasps filled the room. The truth had finally been spoken, not whispered, not guessed, but declared by his own lips. The arrogant men's faces drained of color. The waiter who had turned him away earlier felt his knees weaken. The diners shifted, shame heavy on their hearts. But Keanu did not bask in their shock. Instead, he continued, his voice still soft, still steady. "I do not reveal this to embarrass you," he said, "but to remind you that titles, wealth, and names mean nothing if we do not first know how to respect one another. Tonight, I was treated as less because of what I wore, because of what was assumed. But respect should never be a mask we wear only for those we think are important. Respect must live in us for every person, seen or unseen." His words sank deep, stirring something raw in every listener. The child who had given him bread smiled proudly, as if he had always known. The older woman with the cane nodded, her eyes shining with tears. And the waiter who had shamed him earlier felt the weight of regret so heavy he could barely stand. But Keanu was not finished. He turned toward the arrogant men, his gaze firm, but not cruel. "You came here demanding the best table," he said. "But the best table is not the one nearest the light or farthest from the door. The best table is the one where respect sits. Without it, even gold plates taste bitter." Silence wrapped the room. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. And then suddenly, something unexpected happened. One of the arrogant men, the youngest of the 3, lowered his eyes. His voice, trembling, broke the silence. "I know who you are," he whispered. "And I know what you've done. Years ago, when my brother was sick, you donated to the hospital that saved his life. I never thought I'd meet you. I'm ashamed of how I spoke. The room stirred again. Cracks had begun to form in the wall of arrogance. But this was only the beginning. For the storm outside the door was not just these men. It was the world itself, waiting to see whether kindness could still stand firm against cruelty. The mirror of truth. The restaurant was silent after the young man's confession. Even the sound of the kitchen faded, as if pots and pans themselves held their breath. Keanu stood quietly in the center, his presence calm yet unshakable, like a tree that had weathered storms far greater than this night. The two older men who had entered with arrogance shifted uncomfortably. Their faces hardened, unwilling to admit fault, but the shame in their companion's words clung to them. They looked at each other, then at Keanu, and for the first time, they could not meet his eyes. The diners, once judgmental, now sat in stillness, their thoughts racing. Some felt regret for the way they had looked at him earlier, while others realized how quickly they too might have dismissed someone in his place. Keanu broke the silence, his voice soft but steady. "Do you see now," he asked him, "how quickly we reveal ourselves? Pride convinces us that respect must be earned by status or wealth. But true respect is owed simply because we are human. Tonight, I became a mirror for all of you. What you saw in me was not who I am, but who you are." His words struck deep. The waiter who had first turned him away felt tears sting his eyes. His pride had been stripped bare, and in its place grew a heavy sorrow. He stepped forward, his hands shaking. "I was wrong," the waiter said, his voice breaking. "I judged you by what I saw on the surface. I thought I was protecting this place, but I was only protecting my own ego. I forgot what service means. I forgot what kindness is." He bowed his head, unable to look Keanu in the eyes. "If you wish me gone, I will leave. I do not deserve this job." The room held its breath. But Keanu, instead of anger, carried only compassion. He stepped closer to the trembling waiter and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You do not need to leave," he said softly. "You need to learn. Mistakes do not define us, but how we rise after them does. If you remember this night and choose humility, then it will not be wasted." Tears rolled down the waiter's face. He nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the mercy he had been given. The diners felt the lesson too. Some looked at their own reflections in their glasses of wine, wondering about the strangers they had judged in their lives, the kindness they had withheld out of fear or pride. Keanu turned his gaze back to the room. "This restaurant," he said, "was never meant to be just a place for food. It was meant to be a place where no one is turned away, where dignity is served with every plate. I opened it because I know hunger. Hunger not only for bread, but for belonging, for kindness, for a moment where someone looks at you and says you matter." His voice deepened, carrying both pain and hope. "Many of you came here tonight for fine meals. But what you truly hungered for was respect. Some of you gave it, some of you withheld it. But now you know. Respect is not a luxury. It is the first dish we must all serve." The child who had given him bread clapped his small hands suddenly, the innocence of his joy breaking the heavy silence. A ripple of soft laughter followed, easing the tension. Even the arrogant men who had entered earlier shifted uneasily, their walls cracking under the weight of truth. But just when it seemed the night had reached its turning point, the door opened once more. This time, it was not strangers in suits, nor curious diners. It was a group of workers from the neighborhood, dressed in dusty uniforms, tired from long shifts. They hesitated at the entrance, sensing the tension in the air. The waiter who had once turned Keanu away instinctively stepped forward to block them, but then stopped, remembering his lesson. He turned instead to Keanu, waiting for guidance. Keanu smiled gently, his eyes warm. "Welcome, friends," he said to the workers. "Tonight the best table belongs to you." The room stirred again. Hearts moved, as the workers were led to a table near the center. The diners watched in silence, realizing they were witnessing something far greater than an ordinary evening. Yet beneath the kindness, a new question began to rise. What would happen to those who had mocked him, who had wounded with words sharper than knives? Would mercy be enough to change them, Or would pride return as soon as the night ended? The answer, waiting just ahead, would test not only them but everyone in the room. The lesson that remained: the workers took their seats, their tired faces lighting up as they were offered water and bread first, the very things that had been denied to Keanu earlier in the evening. The diners watched in silence, humbled, as they realized the meaning of true service was unfolding right before their eyes. The arrogant men who had mocked him earlier shifted in their seats uneasy. Their pride, once so loud, was now fragile, cracking under the weight of their own actions. One of them finally stood, his voice low, stripped of its former arrogance. I was wrong," he said, his words trembling. "I thought power was about being served first, about being above others. But tonight I saw a man with everything choose silence instead of anger. I saw him lift others instead of himself. I am ashamed." His companions lowered their eyes. One nodded slowly, the other clenched his fists as if fighting his own pride. Eventually, he too whispered, "Forgive me." Keanu looked at them, his face calm. "Forgiveness is not mine alone to give," he said. "Forgiveness is something you must seek every day by choosing respect. Let tonight not end as shame but as change. Pride can destroy, but humility can rebuild." The restaurant was utterly still, every ear and every heart listening. The waiter, who had once turned him away, now stood near the workers' table, serving them carefully, his hands steady, his eyes filled with something new: humility. He no longer moved with arrogance but with purpose. He had been broken, but in the breaking he had found a truth he would never forget. The diners began to rise, one by one, clapping softly at first, then louder. Not for spectacle, not because he was famous, but because they had witnessed something rare, a man who had been humiliated but chose to answer with grace. Tears welled in the older woman's eyes. The child beamed with joy, proud of the kindness he had shown. The workers smiled, feeling, perhaps for the first time in days, that they belonged somewhere, that they were seen. Keanu raised his hands gently, quieting the applause. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "kindness is not weakness. Humility is not defeat. To serve is not to lower yourself, but to rise above pride. Tonight, this place has shown both the worst and the best of us. Let us choose which side we will carry forward." His words settled in their hearts like seeds waiting to grow. Then, without another word, he stepped toward the door. But before leaving, he paused and looked back one final time. "This restaurant will always welcome you," he said softly. "Not because of who you are, but because you are human. May we never again forget that." And with that, he walked into the cool night air, leaving behind a silence that was not heavy anymore, but filled with something brighter: hope. The diners stayed long after he left, talking quietly, reflecting on what they had seen. The waiter promised himself he would never again judge anyone by appearance. The arrogant men, shaken, knew their lives could no longer be the same if they carried even a fragment of humility forward. And the child, still clutching his mother's hand, whispered, "Mom, he was kind because he wanted to be, not because he had to be." In the days that followed, the story spread far beyond the walls of that restaurant, not as gossip about a celebrity, but as a lesson of humanity. Strangers spoke of the night when humility stood taller than pride, when respect proved stronger than arrogance, and when a simple piece of bread given by a child became the truest meal of all. And so the memory lived on, not as a tale of fame, but as a reminder that greatness is not found in being served, but in serving.